This is Good Girl Gone Human, an ongoing conversation that serves the frequency of rehumanization. We believe that in striving towards being good and away from being bad, we can lose touch with our humanity and uniqueness. Our hope is that in expanding our capacity to accept our own humanity, we expand the capacity to accept and hold each other's humanity as well.
We welcome uncertainty and questions with curiosity. This is not a roadmap for the right way to be human. We hold tenderly how seductive and human it is to reach for a formula that will provide a sense of certainty and safety. This is not that place, but rather a place for dropping into our big, messy questions.
This isn't just for the recovering good girls out there, but for every human who desires to peel off the layers that hide the wholeness of who they are.
We want to tell the stories of how messy and complicated and beautiful it is to find ourselves in the aftermath of this shedding. There is space for your story, and we want you to join us on this journey of rehumanization.
Hello, humans. Welcome to another episode of Good Girl Gone Human. Hi, Kristina.
Hi, Holly. Welcome back.
Welcome back. How are you today?
I'm a lot of things. I'm excited to be here with you again. I am so grateful for this space. It's becoming more and more special each time we come in. And I'm grateful for our friendship right now, always, but right now, and just the comfort and the peace that's there and the witnessing and all the things. And also, you know, there's been lots of silliness too today, and I love that we're both wearing checkers. I just can't get over it.
We did not plan for anyone watching on YouTube. We're both wearing checkers, and we
got
did
this
not
little
plan
checker thing, and it just feels like it's so silly, but it's just like, man, we're in that frequency of whatever it is, connectedness.
Yeah, we're in sync,
it feels
dude.
so sweet. So I'm a lot of things. We're gonna talk more about that today. But how are you?
Yeah, I'm a lot of things as well, and I'm glad you brought up the checkers because I'm like the fun, silly checkeredness feels like the opposite of how I feel, but it's almost like an invitation. Like, we're okay. Look at the lightheartedness. Look at the in syncness. But we're actually coming here today, like having scrapped our original plan for what we were going to talk about, and the reason for that is we're both feeling the weight of grief today. And when we were preparing to record today, we decided the way to humanize ourselves in the here and now was to speak about grief. And it was interesting. At first, I introduced the idea of like, hey, Kristina, if we do the original episode we had prepped, I feel like I'll have to dehumanize myself to get there. That I'll be like, hi, I'm so passionate and like ready to tell you some things today, and I'm not that way today. But it was a really like interesting and helpful conversation to sit with the reality that, hey, it's also very human to have to like put down some grief for a bit and get to work. So we weighed our options, kind of like, okay, should we do that? Should we like support each other? Should we hold each other emotionally and then like get in the zone of talking about what we prepped? And the beautiful and terrifying reality was there's no right or wrong way to do it. So we're coming to you having scrapped that, not because, oh, it would have been so dehumanizing, but that this is what we needed today, is to actually drop in to the heaviness, but with acknowledgement that like of the gratitude that you were speaking to, that we do have the safety right now to like drop in together and basically decide to speak about grief, because to me, I can't think of anything more human than grief. Maybe not anything. Today, as I'm feeling like really full of it, grief that is, it feels like the biggest, most human thing.
Yeah. I think I've been thinking about it a lot this week. There was something you said last week of just like, if we can expand our capacity for grief, or like a lot of this work is expanding our capacity for grief. And I said, and hope, and all these things. We had this little moment. And since we said that, life was like, I don't really believe this, but I want to say, life was like, you want to expand your capacity for grief, eh? I do not actually believe life is like trying to teach me lessons in that way. But there's this part of me that's like, oh yeah, it was like, you want to expand your capacity for grief? Like, here comes some loss. Here comes some pain here. And so, the reframe of that is like, oh yeah, I have opportunities to expand. And I've been really sitting with the realness of that and what it actually feels like in my life. And so it does feel good. It was great that we were on the same page of like, wait, should we, we said even downstairs, is like dehumanizing maybe too intense a word. Do we need to dehumanize ourselves to go and do this work, this podcast work? But there is something dehumanizing about every day. We're a little bit like, we're in it, you guys. So like, if we say anything, dramatic, that's just where we're at today. But there's something dehumanizing about every day when you have to set aside the things that you're grieving to do the things that you must do, Yeah. That's just true. And so we decided to not put ourselves through that right now. And that's okay, because we had the space and time and safety to do that. We also acknowledge that sometimes that opportunity is not there, and you have to like set parts of things down, set part of grief down in order to just like carry on,
Absolutely. And we could have. I believe that we could have. But the way it's sitting on me right now is like, okay, so now we're going to publicly talk about how we're holding a lot of grief. Well, why? And what's sitting on me right now is like, I keep saying that today, what's sitting on me, it's like, that is actually what grief feels like. Like, I'm a human and I'm totally functional, but it feels like an elephant sitting on you.
Yeah.
But collectively, like for years, we've had so much grief to navigate, and we have no choice but to keep going. And there's something to be said about being proud of ourselves for not giving up and for our strength. But to share this moment, like whoever our audience is, it's kind of just an invitation to pause together and say, like, how very human of you to have to push through, and how very human of you to sometimes like need to fall apart a little bit. And I know for me, when I'm scrolling, trying to numb myself on Instagram, there are some beautiful creators I follow that are open about their grief. And it gives me this like, oh, I'm not alone. Grief is so big and we might not ever get rid of it. That's why I called it like the most human thing you can experience. I think that the wounds that like cause the grief will heal, but there's no like getting rid of grief. There's like you said, building the capacity for it and learning to hold yourself in it, and then also learning to ask for others to witness you in it, which is really scary.
Yeah, and important. And I think talking about Instagram, this image just came to my mind of something where it was like this ball. The circle was like grief, and it said, my grief didn't shrink. Something like, my grief didn't shrink, but I expanded. And so there's three kind of vases, three pictures, and the ball is the same size in all three. But at the beginning, the vase is just like barely around the ball, and then the vase gets bigger and bigger. So the grief actually like stayed the same there in that scenario. Like what you're saying, it doesn't go away, but will it always feel the same way? No, I think like we've experienced in our own lives enough profound grief that every day doesn't feel like day one, but it is like a tide, it is like it can come and go, and certain things will trigger grief and some days will be harder. So I think that image of like the ball of grief staying the same size actually helps me, because like you're saying, there's like this societal pressure to be like, make it smaller, make the grief smaller so that you can produce and consume and do all the like all the things that they want us to do. But it's like, there does it shrink? I don't know, but I do know that it doesn't always feel like it does on the first day, or when the breaking happens, or the whatever the moment is, whatever the grief is about, it won't always feel that way. That gives me a little bit of hope.
Yes, I would say yes. And sometimes it's like, okay, good, I made it through like that day one. And like the part where I find it hard to hold myself and like let myself experience it is when there's like, I guess right now I want to call it a flare up. Like it might get big again. Yeah. And I think a question that's kind of like sitting on me right now, there we go again. Everything's sitting on me today. Almost like, how do we build enough self-trust to be open to holding grief?
I think there's this like, if I open myself up to grief, will I ever stop? Will it ever stop? Like, I think I'm very comfortable having a great cry and like leaning into my grief. I can go there, but I do know people who are like, I'm not going there because how will I ever stop? Because it's so big. And for me and my process, and maybe this is some of my human design stuff too that we've talked about, like, I don't know, correct me please if I'm wrong, but like I have this like emotional wave that I have to actually like ride in making decisions and doing things. And so I'm becoming more acquainted with the process of like actually like a really big, good whale. It doesn't empty out the grief tank, but it does release a little pressure, and it might not be like, okay, I cried about it, now like on to the next thing, but for me it's part of my process. But I do know people who it's like, I don't want to touch it because it just feels like it'll consume me, And so for those people, it's like, yeah, it is scary. I think it's just acknowledging like, yeah, we see you. It is hard to touch sometimes. There's certain things where it's unavoidable, there's no denying or pushing it away with some big stuff. But it is possible with a lot of other griefs to just think you're, pushing it away forever. And like, I just want to acknowledge that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, sometimes, like you said, those like big griefs are unavoidable. And then also sometimes there's these little griefs that can build up and up and up and up until, okay, I'll speak more personally. It's like, it gets to the point where like the dam is going to break because everything's built up. I personally go to this, what is wrong with me place. I thought I dealt with this. What? Why? I have to go record a podcast today. For example. And so, I could sit here and think, well, why was I numbing? Why didn't I know? And oh man, it's the messiness of being human, right? Like, I've had a lot on my plate. I really haven't had the time to sit and really tend to it and tend to the young parts of me and the parts of me that are like holding so much grief. There hasn't really been space. All the way back to what you were saying, this like permission out there to like, we're not like, okay, we're talking about grief and like you have to always feel it. It's like it's more so like the messiness of holding yourself where you're at and being brave in letting other people know, like, I'm like not really good.
Yeah, the witnessing piece is like, if it takes bravery to acknowledge your own grief, then there's another layer of bravery in letting other people in. And sometimes it feels good to just be alone in the grief and let it be really messy and not feel like you're having to like put anything on for anyone, any show or anything. But I think if you can foster community of other people who are also working on touching their own grief and holding it, looking at it, feeling it. There is some like real goodness that can come from that. I'm thinking about, this was like months and months and months ago, but my like divorce threshold ceremony is coming to mind. Mm-hmm. And so I got divorced, and then it's just kind of this weird thing that happens in our society where, you know, for many reasons, people's marriages end. But for me, it was like, I got this email, we talk about this. It's like, I got an email on a Tuesday, and it was like, good news, babe. That's not what she said. Babe. Good news, babe. But, it's just like, great news. This is done. And it's like the world would have carried on. That feeling of just like, there's stuff to do, and 20 more emails after that to go through. And I sat in that space for a minute, and then it was like, no, this won't do, and this is part of my life's work and desire and system is about ceremony and stuff. And so I welcomed Holly into that and said, this, I've held circles for people. Holly's been at them. And it's like, I need a circle, and I need it to look like this, and I'll plan this much and you do this much. And essentially we just like gathered, it's people from different like places in my life. Some people were newer friends who didn't maybe even know me married because we had been separated for a while, but people who were in my wedding, my family, and we gathered around, and there was something really profound about letting other people watch you just like grieve. And I was like reading this letter that I wrote to my younger self. I was writing it like from today to the girl who was about to get married. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it was brutal. Mm-hmm. We can kind of almost laugh about it now. It was just like so intense, but I read it in front of these friends of mine. And, afterwards, when we were reflecting on just the process and how it felt and what it was like, everybody was grieving. And I think there's this interesting part about grief too, when there's something happening in a community, not like, oh, my divorce affected everybody so much, but it's just like, it did affect different people in different ways. It changed dynamics of friendship. It changed a lot of things. And so each person was like grieving for me, and they were grieving their part of what this marriage ending looks like in their life. And it was a lot of crying. And then it was a lot of like sitting in it. No one was like, we'll talk about this more when we talk about circle, but no one was comforting me in that moment. The comfort was just in the witnessing. And, and then there was like an actual threshold that was beautiful, and I crossed over it, and there was some words on the other side, and it was this whole ceremony. But I'm just picturing that moment of other people sitting with me in my grief. And I don't think anybody could just like grab 8 of their friends and say, let's do this. Like, I do think I built the capacity for that kind of friendship over time. Yes. And I don't exactly know how to like pinpoint that or what that looks like, but it was intentional. I am creating these kind of relationships in my life where this kind of stuff could happen, And I mean, you were there, so, but that just picture came to my mind, and as such a picture of what we're talking about too.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that in, because I have a few things to say about it from my vantage point. Yeah. So you were the one crossing the threshold that was like all the flowers and stuff on the floor. And I was facilitating the little ceremony. So my vantage point was like a little different. And it was so profound to, as someone who like became your friend after your marriage had ended, everyone that was there witnessing actually had been holding you through the divorce and at various different points in your story. And it felt, it's almost like not words for it. It's making me emotional. As the ceremony was going on, it was like, it felt like this beautiful, like, just like sobbing together release. Like you kind of already said it, where they were grieving for you and for their own individual thing, but also like all coming together to grieve. It was like the various friends probably had to be strong for you at certain points. It was just like permission to just like feel it together and then hold you on the other side when you stepped over with all of our hopes for you and all of our like just speaking life into you. Mm-hmm. And I love that you brought the community piece into it, because you are constantly left and right initiating people into ceremony, into like, hold on, an email on a Tuesday is not going to cut it. We're going to pause and we're going to breathe, and we're going to always and forever bring music into it.
So much music.
So much music. And it's actually like, speaking of music, you made a threshold ceremony playlist, and like sometimes when I'm feeling big feelings, I'll put it on. Like, it's just the ripples of it. You couldn't even imagine. And I think that like to flesh out it's like, you're like, I don't know how to say, like, just grab 80 of your friends. You built the capacity, and your community like knows, oh, this feels good to pause for circle, to pause to honor this, that, and the other. I think it started with probably you building the capacity within yourself first.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I feel like with every episode we do, I'm kind of like battling with myself. Like, what comes first? You building capacity within yourself, or when you're brave enough because someone's watching you? It's sort of like, maybe it's not so formulaic to say like, you did this hard thing, but if you were running from yourself and you didn't want to look at it, you didn't want to hold it.
Right. No one's going to sit there with me in that way. You know, like, you guys were able to do that thing. Like you always say, I trust you with you. It's like, you have your grief and we're here with it. And then it's interesting too, like how it ended. It wasn't like everyone like walked out with their head down and, went home.
They were trying to set you up with
it's like, I mean, we were laughing and that's that capacity thing. And I think it isn't this like, because I could hold my own grief, because that's a little like pull up your bootstraps mode,
Very
like
true, which
if
I do to myself.
if I can hold my own grief, if my capacity expands, then other people can come around me. It's like that's like a weird slippery slope too. It's more like parallel tracks next to each other. It's like, as I'm able to hold myself, as I experiment with letting people witness that, then people witness it and they reflect back to me what they see, and I see their grief, and it's like this evolution over time that's a lot more back and forth. And it makes me think about this week. Like, I mean, I was sitting with someone in their grief, right? So then I'm on the other side, but the grief I feel in my body too, in my own way, right? And I did feel like, okay, I can just let this thing be terrible. It's terrible. And I can just sit here and let you soak in how terrible this is and how awful it feels. And I know what it's like to sit there and let someone just see me without solving, without doing anything. And so it does give you the capacity to offer that to other people, even though you're holding your own grief about a situation. And so it's just this journey, and there is no formula, and, that's not to say like, okay, I crossed my threshold of my divorce and now I'm a new woman. And
no more grief.
Thank goodness that's done. I mean, different things at different times are gonna for sure take me out about that grief. And I really see it as that image of like, that grief's size hasn't changed at all. And I don't think the grief about my marriage ending will ever go away. Like, as intense as that feels, like when we say like, is this forever? It's like, maybe, but I do believe that my container has shifted a lot. Like, the container of me has shifted. So what felt like just cramped, like, is there room for joy? Is there room for hope? All these other things. It's like, okay, as I'm shifting and my container's expanding or taking new form, the grief can still be there. And when like joy slips in, I don't have to be like, we don't have room for you here. Like, I mean, get out. Like, there's more space for joy and for so many other feelings. And it doesn't just like, it's not pushing the grief down.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. It's almost like it takes so much bravery to let your whole self be witnessed and exist. Whether it's like, because joy is kind of like a big vulnerable feeling. Well,
Yeah,
for me.
it is. No,
So
it
it's
is.
like, actually, we're talking about how big grief feels and how it's hard. It's like sometimes it's also hard to let yourself feel the bigness of joy as well. And so it's really pointing back to maybe not the, like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and like make this like expand yourself. It's like I keep hearing the word like belonging over and over. It's like when you were sitting with your friend that was going through something terrible, it's like you were saying all of you belongs here with me.
Yeah.
And all of me belongs here. And there's nothing to fix because the thing you're experiencing is horrific. And almost like you're holding so much space in the present for the unbearable grief. It's almost like that's creating space for future you and future them to hold so much joy also. And we're only saying joy and grief. There's like a million feelings, but it's like to expand and not fix, and to just say, this is horrible. It shouldn't have happened. Like just letting that be the present reality. We can then trust ourselves to meet each day knowing we can hold ourselves in whatever we're feeling today. And it doesn't negate the grief. The joy doesn't negate the grief. The grief doesn't negate the joy. It's the messiness of being human together. And the more we can like do that, like you said, parallel alongside each other, not I gotta fix me and get me right first before I can belong with you in my grief. But the messiness of expanding to hold the whole spectrum.
Yeah, that's the humanizing part for sure. Is like, and it's hard. I mean, this week, like I said, was just like full of loss and different things. And did I still have to go to meetings every day? Like, yeah, I'm sitting on Zoom and having small talk, and I don't want to tell everybody at work how I'm doing with the like, how are you question. It's like, oh, big week, or, whatever you want to say. And that's appropriate too. What we're not saying is like everybody is given access to your grief either. Ooh. So I think there's some wisdom in like a lot of things. A lot of this requires wisdom. The wisdom to know when you have the time. Like you said, this week I don't have time to have that big cry. So, it can be a little dehumanizing, but it's like, oh yeah, Thursday night, I'm going to be alone. I'm going to make space for that big cry, and it will come if you've been holding it in. Or like the wisdom to know this person might use my grief against me. Unfortunately, this person might look at me differently, or look at the person I'm grieving with differently. So like there's a lot of wisdom that has to be applied here too. But the balance of just like knowing when you can hold yourself in it, when you need to reach out for help, all of this is like such a learning curve and such a dance. And not every grief is like catastrophic. I'm thinking about dating, and it's like there's this grief of like relationships ending, however long they are. And like there can be like micro griefs too. I think, where you're like, oh, I'm sad because this is different or it's ending, but also like I know I'm okay. Like there's not this like this is the end. I mean, some grief is just like you're not the same. There's a before and after moment, and that grief will be with you forever in a big way. Then there's these grief where it's like, can I let myself also feel grief about something that will probably feel small in a month or two, but today it feels big. Are both okay? Like, do I need to like quantify it, or I don't know, give myself permission to be sad about small things too.
Yeah. There's definitely, I'm a huge advocate for let grief be grief. Sometimes I worry I'm viewed as a little bit of like an Eeyore People don't really go to me for their joy. I'm working on it, but like people know I can
sit.
Oh, like that felt grieving.
grief,
that,
yeah.
and then this really small thing. You make so much sense. Like,
let me put a song on. Hold on, I got a song for this.
Yeah, I got a song. I will never tell you it's too small.
Yeah.
But I think that the word hope popped in my head as you're talking. Like the hope that you put into when you're dating someone new. It's like hope is kind of a bitch. Like you hope, and it's like hope and loss are always playing.
Yeah.
It's like if you shut off your access to hope, then you can do that to protect yourself from loss. Oh, yes. It'll never get better. I'll never find someone. It'll never feel good. And that is like, at some times I utilize that coping strategy of hopelessness. But I think what's stretching me now is like, I actually think I've made it through a lot of loss and a lot of heartache, and I want to live.
I know.
I feel hope for my life, and I didn't for a long time. And then there were times this past year that I lost the hope again, and I was brave in a new way, new to me, in asking someone to witness the hope I had lost and like to maybe hold it for me.
Yes.
And I feel like there's this kind of like crunchy thing I want to name that I'm like, I don't know if I've ever like talked about this before, but a lot of what you were saying was kind of like pulling this out of me. This is maybe not my most favorite thing about me. It's the Eeyore stuff, but I'm pretty comfortable in being sad. It doesn't really scare me, but I have this big looming worry that everyone's like really sick and tired of like, why can't you just get past it now? And can it not be that big? Could you just fake it till you make it? And I'm always worried about being reflected back in that way. Like, hey, actually, like we heard you the first 10,000 times. Like, I think that's why I go to the pull yourself up by your bootstraps thing. Cause I'm like, I actually don't think anyone can hold how big the grief feels in my body. So I'm going to cancel the podcast. I'm going to until I'm feeling more sparkly. And so I think that where that's coming from, if you can all follow this long, windy story with me, is something you said is there's wisdom into knowing who can hold your grief because some people will use it against you. I think what happened in my 20s is I felt so lost and full of grief and sad that I let anyone have it. Please have it. Please see me. Please hold. Please hear me process again and again and again and again. And it turned into, there's this really painful, it's like a little bit funny now, but whenever I think about it, I'm like, that's really sad. I was at this like church retreat and we were all just, there was like art supplies available and we were like all drawing something. I don't remember the prompt, but I started to draw a rain cloud that was rain. And I was going to draw a flower under it because there's this John Foreman lyric that says, future flowers from all this rain. And that is how I hold my grief and my hope at the same time. Like, hey, the rain's not meaningless. Yeah. But I got called away and I only drew a rain cloud. But I overheard some of the women saying, whose is that? Oh, of course it's Holly's. Like, how funny. And they were laughing. Yeah. And I was like sitting like right there. And I was like, do they not know that I'm hearing them laugh? That they're like, of course she drew a rain cloud. Yeah. And I think that there's this part of me that's like, oh, that means you're alone. Yeah. Everyone is.
You were right.
Sick of this.
They can't hold it. Yeah.
And so there's this kind of crunchy, okay, well, I could completely shut down. I kind of want to. No one cares. Like, whatever. And the truth was I did have to keep holding myself. I think that's why I'm like, I do want to keep advocating for this. You've got you, like, be who you needed when you were younger, like all this like buzzwords, because I was alone and I did have to do a lot of this, like holding myself by myself. I was never like truly alone. Like I had my partner and everything, like, but there are some times where I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. And the loss is too big that.
Yeah. Do you feel like you've created since that time, right? Since your 20s, do you feel like you've created a different kind of community around you where like now those resources are there? Because some of that just sounds a little bit like 20-year-old stuff too, but I think
So true.
we know like, that's not to say there's not 40 or 50-year-olds who don't have community around them who can hold their stuff. I think there's a lot of people who don't have community around them who can hold their stuff. And so I think like the practice of being with grief, knowing that grief will come. I think that's what I'm sitting today when you were like, let's talk about grief. And it was just like, well, and I'm more, sunshine, and I would draw the big flower first and then maybe like the little rain cloud in the corner. Remember it rained and the flower came. But today it was like, you want to talk about grief? Yeah. What the fuck else is there to talk about? You know what I mean? Like, and it's just going to keep coming back, and there's just more grief and everything's on fire. And I can get a little like, everyone's sad and everything is terrible. Right. And so there's this like exhale I have to do. Like, what sucks is that that's true. It's true that like hard, bad, unfair, painful things are going to keep happening to me and people I love. And my kids. Forever. Wah, wah. End of podcast. Just kidding. It's this like, yeah, that will happen. And I have responsibility to myself to choose what kind of life I want to have in the midst of all of this chaos. And so for me, when my life was falling apart and I was in the pits, it was like no more of this lone wolf stuff. Like there's just no way you're going to make it if you don't have people around you who can see you, and you don't have to be shiny for them and sunshiny and happy. And it can be real messy. It can be real sad. And my life has really shifted a lot since I was like having that realization. Like I can't and I will not do this alone. But I have a lot of grief for people who don't have that around them.
Oh, me too.
And I think that's where you said, like, when I'm doom scrolling and somebody's like, man, this is what grief feels like in my body today. And you're like, oh yeah, other people are feeling grief. Thank God, Thank God. When we're just alone, but it's rough.
Yeah. And I think like you asking me like, do you feel like you've built community around you that can hold you? I feel like what my process has looked like is this like almost like fight to believe that that's true. Fight to believe that I can belong with other people while I'm holding immense sadness and melancholy. It's almost like life circumstances are pushing me out of the lone wolf mindset. Whereas I think how I used to operate was, yeah, like I've had like really dear good friends that could like, coffee once a month, and I could be really honest about how I'm actually doing. But it's like that list of people got smaller and smaller because I was being very careful about who I let see all of it. Yeah. And that's okay. But I think that was just the process of like, move towards, am I safe? And then move away. And it was just tidy. It was like, I didn't have to, I'm like stay-at-home mom. And I'm just like with my kids all the time. And then like schedule time with like an adult to hang out with, and then be like, blah, here's actually what's really going on. And it was just kind of tidy. And so now that it's like, I have this important work I want to do in the world, this art I want to create with my friend, like, do I need to be shiny for her? Do I need to figure this shit out? Do I need to cancel and isolate and hibernate all winter and then be like, see you in a few months? Like, no.
Yeah.
No. But like that process of building like the inner safety and then also the safety with you to do that. It's like, I've told you before, like your friendship changed my life, where there's so many times over the past 6 months I would have kind of disappeared. And then told you at coffee, it's not like, oh, like, I didn't have anyone, but like you were checking in with me like all the time, and I was just like, oh, this feels weird that like somebody is like knowing like the play-by-play of the grief. And I'm grateful. And it is not something I take for granted, because not everybody has that. I think that's why I wanted to like, can we just sit with our grief on a podcast? Because like when I was alone, like I'm thinking of like a really terrible postpartum time, it was Instagram creators that made me feel not alone. And that is like, we can like demonize social media all we want. Like that's not small, and that matters.
Yeah. The reflecting back, it's the belonging. It's like, I feel like I have belonging in my like physical world, but I belong here. And I just think there's this conversation, it fits into all this so much. We like haven't even touched on what it feels like to try to be good and grieve well, and I was like joking with the friend I was sitting with this week, because we're both Enneagram 1s, which are like the reformers, and we have loud inner critics, and we want to be like the perfectionists, And I was like, let's not like Enneagram 1 all over this, We don't need to do this well. We don't need to do this well. And so it's like trying to be good at grieving even, what does that mean? Not being a burden, not being inconvenience to anybody, not letting it affect you too much, like being, all these pleasantries. Which again, with wisdom, do we need to be unpleasant all the time? We're not saying that. But I think, coming from this good girl label, putting that down in grief just looks like, I'm a human. This is messy. Yeah. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what to do next. The uncertainty that comes with grief. And we keep tying it in, this grief and joy, or grief and hope. Hope and joy are very vulnerable emotions. When you're dealing with grief, the idea of hope is terrifying, because if I'm just going to sit in my grief, and that's just my new zip code, that's where I live now, is grief, and like, this is where I'll be if you need me. I'll be crying in the corner. Like, that's an option, and there's actually a little bit more security in that. It's like, this is it.
Oh yeah.
To say, I am visiting Grief Town. It's terrible. And like, gosh, I think maybe I'll be okay one day. Ugh, that's like way more vulnerable, because then if you're not, it feels like you failed, or, when the grief comes back, or when joy comes in, it's like, did this thing not matter that I was grieving? And so I just think, there's a little bit of like a cop out in being like, I'm just grieving forever. Yeah. And it takes a lot of bravery to be like, I guess, like, foolish as it is. I think I wrote this in a poem one time. Foolish as it is, like, here I am hoping again. Like, what a fool, Yeah. And so it's just like, but that's what I choose, because the alternative to me is not the life that I want. I want the full spectrum of the human experience, which means I'm sobbing in my car on the way home from friends' houses sometimes. And the world feels tiny and terrible. And it means sometimes life feels really expansive, and it feels really, really good.
When you were like feeling it was like a week or so ago, you were sharing with me something that was heavy and full of grief. You texted me like the most wise wisdom. Wow.
Lay it on me.
Really,
what did I say?
You said, I was just checking in with you, and you said, I know I'm going to be okay, so I'm going to let myself be really sad right now. And I tucked that away in my heart. Like, I actually think I said it to myself this morning. Yeah. I love that about you. You have all these little isms that I'm like, now I will say that forever. But I feel like there's such wisdom in that, of like, grief and hope can coexist. I think sometimes, like, even in this conversation, I'm like, there's this tug of war, like, feel the grief now so you can feel the hope later. It's like, oh, the grief will never go away, so just deal with it, because that's how I'm feeling today. Yeah. But it's like, maybe the expansion is expanding to hold all of it. They can coexist. There could be this song made me feel alive and I have a memory associated with the song. And then the next song is like, this song has a different memory attached to it. It's like letting it all flow.
Flow. Oh my goodness. Flow is like such a good word, because that's it. It's like even me saying, I know I'm going to be okay, so I'm going to let myself be really sad, is just like what right now needs is my sadness. And it was almost like that reminder to me, like I said, when people don't want to open the grief box because they're afraid it'll never shut again. It's like, I'm willing to go here because I know myself, and this isn't where I'm going to land. But I also know it'll come back again, and I'll say, okay, I was okay then. I'll be okay again. And for right now, not okay. I'm not okay. Yeah, a lot of that has been my good girl deprogramming. Letting myself not be okay, I think, is also a faith deprogramming, that like there's a lot of platitudes in grief in spiritual spaces. And it's, in some ways I see it getting better, and in some ways I see people learning to hold things in a different way. But I mean, yeah, now I'm thinking about when I was in my faith community really severely, and I was like dealing with a miscarriage, right? Another just terrible grief. And it's like people say things to you sometimes without thinking about what they're saying. And it's like this, I don't know. I don't even want to name the things, but it's just like minimizing for the sake of like, but you're okay, right? God's good, right?
That
I'm like,
will
God's
get my
good,
anger going.
And I'm not okay right now. Like, we're not even talking about God right now. I'm just talking about how sad I am,
Ooh.
And so I think there's a lot of deprogramming and a lot of holding self and a lot of seeking out community. I mean, these are like tools and resources. And I know we both know that we're not going to package up and go like, great, that was grief, and how to deal with it and how to be a human about it. And there's no like fundamentalism we want to bring in here either, but it's hard. It just feels hard.
It's so hard. There is like the faith community story kind of got my anger going. I just got to let it come out real quick. I think that there's just, that's a horrible thing to tell someone. And it's kind of here's what it is. It's like this is my belief. I said that so strongly. Here's what it is, people. Oftentimes people will minimize like, but God is good, because they're uncomfortable with your grief, and they need you to feel better. Because if you feel better, then you're not bringing that to them for them to hold. So then they can be around you. So it's this tricky thing. And so I like that you said it comes down to knowing yourself. What you said a few minutes ago, you know yourself. So you know you're going to get through this. You know that you need to hold yourself in the sadness. A lot of this, because I'm like, okay, it's not really like learn to hold yourself on your own before you can bring it to community, kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But there is that radical responsibility that needs to be taken for knowing oneself, for knowing how that felt like this in my body and that affected me in this way, emotionally, spiritually. There's so much like self-trust and that comes with knowing yourself. And I would also say that like that is when you know yourself too, you know your capacity.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about deprogramming the good girlness, and the other side of it than what you talked about earlier is someone comes to you with their pain and their grief. And perhaps you're feeling like you want to God is good them. God is good all the time, even in the whatever.
Amen.
Amen, sister.
Yeah.
But like the capacity, like to know yourself is like, instead of like, oh, that's too much, let me push it back at you, which is a human thing that we can have those ruptures and repairs, right? But kind of what I'm feeling like I want to speak to right now is what would happen if you knew yourself and you knew your capacity and you're feeling like your friend needs you to hold this space for them, and you are the honest, true, not good girl or good boy part of you is saying, there's just not capacity. Mm-hmm. How do we belong with each other and witness each other and not minimize our God is good each other in that? And I think it comes down to, well, one, that takes another bravery. Hey, I hear you. Thank you for sharing with me my capacity today is below 0, but I want you to know I love you so much, and I'm going to have to check in X amount of days because I can't answer the phone or something like that. It's like, that's also like where we can get trapped in trying to be good is I'm going to put all of me down because somebody needs me.
Self-sacrifice. Yeah. In the name of service. And being like, here's how I can show up for you right now. Let me check it, and it's not putting, I think there's this, I don't want to put the burden on the grieving person to now hold my capacity and check, are you able to like be there for me now? It's like, I will take that radical responsibility, say, here's what I have the capacity to do for you. I will send you a meal next week. Maybe it's like next week or whatever. Let's plan a coffee date so I can check, you're kind of giving them the capacity meter, and not making them wonder. Because there are ways that we want to be, obviously, we're not trying to be insensitive or anything or say like, I don't have capacity, so I can't. I mean, think about all the ways parenting pushes us past our capacity, but it's like,
for sure.
We know we can do it. But if we want to make lasting friendships, if we want to have lasting belonging and authentic belonging is maybe more what I want to say than lasting. However long it lasts, that it could be authentic, it's going to require honesty, and I think the good girl thing is where I was just not honest with myself. I didn't know myself to even know how to be honest and advocate for my needs like that at different times. And if you can not take things personally, and this is the thing we talk about a lot, is if I'm rehumanizing myself, it's going to give me more grace and capacity to humanize other people.
Yes.
So when other people come to me with their no's and it's the I love your no thing, it's like, okay, I'm going to believe that you still care about me, even though you can't be there for me right now. And that hurts. And I hate it.
Yes.
Where else can I go? Is there another resource I have? And so I just think this conversation is so broad and big, and I can feel that we're a little like lighter than when we started today, because there's just witnessing and some holding. So I'm grateful.
I'm grateful too. I'm proud of ourselves that we took a risk to just name what was here. There's grief here. Can we share it together and like put it into microphones?
Yeah.
So thank you for bringing all of you and being willing to like take this risk with me and share our grief with the humans out there.
Yeah. And maybe today you're listening and you're like not in that grief space. And so you can come back to this at another time. Maybe there's somebody in your life that's going through grief. Maybe you just needed to know that you're not alone. And we say that we want community to form around this, but also like maybe it will help you to reflect on like what your community looks like. Do I have people in my life? What would it look like to expand my community? To be able to hold more parts of me as I simultaneously am working on holding more parts of myself. We know this work is a marathon. It's not a sprint. There's no formula. This is how to have a good human life. It's just like today, this is where we're at. And so, yes, thank you for witnessing us and going on this journey of just talking about what grief looks like and what it feels like in our body. And we see you, we see you. And so this week, we want you to remember, if grief comes, if it's coming for you, if it's coming for people in your life, or something you thought you dealt with comes back and it's feeling so tender, just remind yourself, you are a badass and the most fragile thing. Treat yourself as both.
We love you.
See you next time.